Hey guys, we're going to do an installation of FreeBSD 2.2.2 on this 486DX266, but the CD-ROM in this computer is not working, so we're going to have to do this the hard way. I'm actually going to do a network-based install from the 486DX33 sitting on the floor. This is a Solaris 2.5.1 system. I'm going to mount the CD-ROM in that computer, and we'll connect via FTP to do the installation. Now, this video is going to be very Unix-heavy. I understand Unix is not everybody's cup of tea, so if this one's not for you, feel free to bail. I completely understand. But on your way out, consider hitting that like button. So let's get started. I'm going to log into the Solaris 2.5 box. And we need to do two things here. First, I'm going to mount the CD-ROM, and then we're going to set up an FTP server. So let's pull up a command prompt. And of course, I need to switch to root. Before we do anything at all, let's check and see what file systems are currently mounted. Okay, we've got our root file system, proc, fd, export home, and temp. And now if I put in the FreeBSD 2.2.2 CD, Solaris will automatically mount it. That's because of the vol-d daemon. Now you see it's mounted there on /CD-ROM. Now, unfortunately, that's not where I want it mounted. I could work around that, but let's cancel that and remount the disk on the proper location. So first, I'm going to use the eject command to unmount that disk. And then we need to turn off the volume management daemon. And to do that, I'm going to execute the etc init vol mgt and give it a stop. And now we can manually mount that disk where we want it. All right, let's just check and make sure I've got the right device file here. Yeah, it should be a C0D1S0, I believe. Yep, that's correct. Okay, now I don't want it on /mnt. I'm going to mount that on 2.2.2-release. That's actually where FreeBSD is going to expect it. And now we need to make sure the FTP daemon is enabled. Okay, if I check the netstat-an output, no, it looks like port 21 is not open. So FTP is currently not running. That means we need to edit the etc inetd.conf and uncomment the line for FTP. Yeah, and let's turn on telnet while we're at it just in case. So we'll save that file, and then we need to restart the inetd daemon. So if I do a ps-ef and pipe it to a grep for inetd, that shows me the process ID of the daemon. That's 91 in this case. And then we'll do a kill-hup and send a hang-up signal to the daemon. Okay, so that'll force inetd to reread its configuration file, the etc inetd.conf, and that should enable FTP and telnet. So if I rerun that netstat-an, we should see port 21 and 23. And yep, they are listening. Perfect. Okay, so FTP and telnet are enabled. So we should be all set to start the installation of FreeBSD on this computer. If I look under 2.2.2/release, you can see the contents of the FreeBSD CD. And the installer is going to access that information via the FTP server that we just created. So going over to the 486DX266, we'll pop into BIOS here. And I'm going to be installing on the 512 meg compact flash card. I have my Gotek floppy emulator as the A drive. But before we try and boot from the FreeBSD installer floppy, I'm actually going to go into DOS and remove any existing partitions from that drive. I believe I had a copy of Slackware on this drive. So we'll make sure that's gone before we attempt the install of FreeBSD. Okay, going into fdisk, let's display the existing partitions. And yeah, we've got a non-DOS partition, so let's delete that. And this time I'll reboot, and we'll boot from the FreeBSD installer floppy. Now I'm using a local FTP server to do this install. You actually don't have to. There are servers out on the internet that still have old versions of FreeBSD. All you'd have to do is download the installer floppy or the floppy image, as I'm doing here, and you could actually point your system to that network-based server somewhere out there on the internet. You don't even need to download the CD-ROM image. And of course, if you had a stable internet connection back in the late 1990s, you could have done it exactly the same way. So this is pretty advanced for its time. So we're going to start by configuring the kernel. Now to do this, you really need some intimate knowledge of your hardware. I know what I've got in here for an IDE controller. And let's remove everything else, including that tape drive. If I go into network, now I have an NE2000 clone and ISA network card in this system. So I'm going to remove everything else. But my network card is not on IRQ5 and address 280, so I need to modify that. It's actually at address 300 and IRQ10. No, 10, not 510. Okay, good. Let's save that info. Yeah, I've only got one parallel port. And then under input, now I'm not going to have a mouse on this system. Oh, good point though, that syscon's console driver, leave that there. If you remove that, when you go to the next step, you won't have a working monitor. You'll just have a black screen. Ask me how I know. All right, that looks good. And there's no indication of conflicts at the top of the screen anymore. So we'll save that info and proceed with the installation. All right, and as that scrolls past, you might notice ED0, and it shows a MAC address. There's our network card, NE2000. Now, if I hadn't updated those network card parameters, the installer probably would not have detected the card properly. Okay, so we're doing an FTP-based installation. Now, I do need to change the username. There's an account on the Solaris server called Annika. I'm going to change the FTP username to Annika and put in the corresponding password. And you notice it says the release name as 2.2.2-release. That's why I named that directory as 2.2.2-release. Now, I could adjust that information from here, but the less things we need to tweak, the better. So let's do a novice installation. I'm going to use the entire disk for FreeBSD. And I need to set that bootable. Good, save that information. And we need a boot manager. And now it wants to partition the disk. Normally I would simply create a root partition and a small swap partition. But every time I tried to do that with this old version of FreeBSD, the system failed to boot. So I'm just going to do an automatic layout on the partitions. It created a very small root, a small var, and a pretty big user directory. And now we need to pick what we're going to install. Now with 512 megs, we are a little bit tight on space. I don't want to install anything that I don't really need. But the ports collection does contain a lot of useful software. So I'm going to say yes to this. In older versions of FreeBSD, everything had to be compiled from source. We'll come back to that later in the video. Now I'm just going to do a standard user installation here. I won't be configuring X11, or I should say X-free86 on this system. And now we need to point it to the FTP server. And I believe that's a 192.168.2.56. Let's double check here. I'll just switch briefly over to my modern system. And let's ping Emily, see what her IP address is. That's correct. Okay, so that is our Solaris server. That's the FTP server that we're installing from. Okay, the server we're installing to is Lily. Gateway 192.168.2.1. And same with the name server. Oh, and what is the proper IP address for Lily? I'll just check that as well here. Okay, creating file systems. And now let's see if it'll connect to our FTP server. Beautiful. Yep, we've got a proper connection to the FTP server, and that information is transferring. So there's a lot of information it needs to transfer across the network, and this is going through a pair of 10BASE-T Ethernet cards. So let's skip forward. Okay, installation is complete. We've got a few configuration items that we need to take care of, but the hard part is over. Good, let's set our time zone. And add a couple of non-root users. As always, it's a good idea to add a couple of non-root users to your system. The root account is good for configuration, but you really don't want to run as root on a regular basis. It's too easy to damage something. Okay, so as per usual, I'm going to add Scott, Annika, and Philip. And we'll set the password for root, of course. All right, so it's time to reboot. Cross your fingers, and let's see if this worked. Beautiful. Yep, we are booting into FreeBSD. Okay, just log in as root. And we don't have bash. Okay, well that's the first thing we need to fix. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to compile that from source. Let's go into user ports. It should be under shells and bash. Okay, it's been a while since I did this. Let's see if I can remember how. Okay, yep, make install clean. And of course, it's reaching out to the server to try and download the source package, which is not going to work. That's okay. I can copy that from the FreeBSD 2.2.2 CD. I believe it's on disk 2. I'd have to copy that into the user ports dist files directory, I believe. Okay, so let's pop over to Jasmine so I can use my capture card and make this a little bit easier to see. All right, so I've telnetted into the system using PuTTY. And we're back under user ports. And as you can see, I've got bash and Apache copied into the dist files directory. Okay, so let's go back into shells. We'll go into bash. And we'll try that compilation once again. Okay, make install clean. And that's better. Now it's doing a compilation. We'll just kind of fast forward through this. Okay, there we are, and we have bash. Perfect. So that gives me command line history and tab autocomplete. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's one of those little creature comforts that you really get used to in a modern Unix or Unix variant. So while we're here, I'm going to compile the Apache web server as well. Now, of course, this is an older version. I think it said 1.2, but no matter. Oh, okay, it's already installed. I'll just uninstall that and reinstall it. I was actually playing around with this off camera. Okay, so let's try and start the web server. No, it looks like we need to set the server name. Okay, so I just got to find the configuration file for Apache. And good. Yep, there it is right there, httpd.conf. So let's edit that. And we're looking for the server name. There it is right there. Okay, so this system is Lily. We'll just change that. Save that file. And now I should be able to start the Apache web server on this computer. No, I just need to update the hosts file with Lily's IP address. And let's start HTTPD. Okay, so far so good. If I check in the netstat output, there it is right there. You see we've got port 80 showing as listening. Port 80, of course, is HTTP. Okay, so if I bring up a web browser and point it to Lily, let's see if it shows a web server. And yes, it does. Not much there, but yeah, we do have a working web server. Now, if I go down into the data directory for Apache, I'm just going to slap together a really quick web page here. And save that. Refresh. There's our index.html. And yes, indeed, we've got a web server. Definitely not going to win any awards for web design. So let's see what else we've got in here. Of course, we've got telnet. Well, we kind of knew that. I'm telnetted into the system. And we have FTP. Let's pull up a command prompt, and I'll FTP into the server as well. Okay, we're going to FTP to 192.168.2.44. And log in as Scott. Yep, FTP is working as well. Now, of course, I haven't done anything in terms of security here. This is really just a proof of concept. And yeah, we can transfer files to and from the FTP server. So that is indeed working. And there's one last thing I want to touch on here. Being an old Unix, this one does have the finger command. Now, if you're not familiar with finger, I touched on that in my Unix security video. Basically, it was just a fun way of getting information about other users on the system. For example, if I run a finger against the Annika user, you can see where she's logged in from, when she last logged in, what shell she's using, whether she has any unread mail, and if she has any plans for the day. Now, a lot of sysadmins started turning the finger daemon off in the 1990s. It is a bit of a security risk. If you were trying to gain unauthorized access to a system, the information provided by finger could be very helpful. So let's try and finger Annika from the Windows system. And yes, indeed, you can see it does show her information remotely from the Windows system. Now, if I update her .plan file off camera and rerun that finger command, you can see it shows the updated plans. Of all the Unix commands that they could have implemented in Windows, you gotta wonder why they chose finger. It's kind of an odd and somewhat suspicious choice. Now, you may be wondering why I didn't configure x86 on this system. FreeBSD is largely considered to be a server operating system, so I wanted to show it more in its historical context. Now, that's not to say you can't use FreeBSD as a desktop. I've actually been running FreeBSD on the desktop for 10, 12 years now, but an old version like this was oriented more toward the server market. If you do want to see x86 on an old system like this, check out my Slackware 4.0 video. On that one, I did actually configure the GUI and display a couple of applications as well. So if you enjoyed this one, please feel free to like and subscribe, drop a comment down below, and as always, thanks for watching.